The year is a time so distant that it lives more in memory than in history, a time when the great rivers of the world were not only the lifeblood of nations, but also the threads upon which daily life was gently strung. Our story begins along such a river, slow, steady, ancient, where the dawn does not rush but rather seeps into the world like honey poured from a clay jar. At first, the sky is the smallest suggestion of light, a thought before a word, a breath before a song. The darkness loosens its hold on rooftops and courtyards, slipping away across the fields like a receding tide. A breeze stirs the tall reeds and sets their feathery tops whispering to one another, as if they are trading secrets they have kept all night. Somewhere a hoopoe calls, and from far downriver the faint thud of a fisherman's pole knocking the side of his boat counts out the seconds of a new day. The village that rests on the river's slow bend wakes in layers. First comes the soft scrape of sandals on hard-packed earth. Then a door hinge sighs, a clay jar clinks against another. A child coughs sleep from a small chest. The scent of smoke arrives in thin, blue strands. Someone has coaxed an ember back to life with patient breath, and the ember, pleased, agrees to become fire. Houses of mud brick gleam with dew as if the night has brushed them with a damp hand. Reed roofs glisten, each drop catching the newborn light and holding it, briefly, like a promise. In a narrow lane between two courtyards, a woman named Tariff lifts a jug and pads toward the river. She walks with the practiced balance of someone who has carried water since her arms were small. Her shadow, long and delicate, keeps pace beside the reed fence. When she reaches the bank, she kneels, tips the jug sideways, and lets the coolness sigh in. The river smells faintly of iron and green. It has smelled that way for as long as anyone remembers. Tariff dips her free hand, lets the water run over her fingers, and whispers a greeting that her grandmother taught her. For the river, for the morning, for the day to come. Downstream, a fisherman named Menon shoves his skiff from the mud and slides into the current without making a sound. His nets, mended by lamplight the evening before, lie folded like patient wings at his knees. He knows the wide brown back of the river the way a shepherd knows the slope of a familiar hill. He has names for its eddies, nicknames for its quiet places, and a respectful silence for the deep, slow pools that keep their own counsel. He spreads the first net with a motion that is half art and half memory, the weights kissing the surface, the rope hissing as it pays out. Rings widen, overlap, and then settle. Beneath them, the river resumes its unreadable face. In the market square, a patch of packed earth where a sycamore throws a generous circle of shade. Two boys chase each other with sticks, pretending the sticks are oars, then spears, then shepherd's crooks, then oars again. A potter and his daughter arrive with a cart that squeaks apologetically at every rut. They unload bowls the color of warm sand, jars as tall as a child, lamps pinched in a style the potter learned from his father and his father before him. The daughter arranges them on woven mats, turning each piece so the morning sun can find the subtle curve meant for a human hand. A scribe sets up near the potter, because people buying jars often discover they also need a letter written, and wipes his reed pen with a cloth he keeps folded in a little ivory case. He is a neat man who loves tidy piles, straight edges, and the graceful spine of a fresh papyrus sheet. His name is Nebu, and when he smiles, it is with his eyes first, then with the corners of his mouth. Children hover a careful distance away, pulling at their tunics, fascinated by the way black lines appear wherever his pen travels. Nebu pretends not to notice them staring. He writes the date, he titles a list, he tests a nib. Then he looks up and says, "Would one of you like to hold the ink stone?" For hands shoot up as if launched by springs. The smell of baking bread reaches the square in a warm wave. Ovens shaped like beehives wake fully, their domes sighing heat back toward the sky. Women slap discs of dough against the hot inner walls, and the dough clings, bubbles, browns, and lifts to release a toasted scent that makes even the river breathe more deeply. Oil waits in small bowls, salt waits in a clay pinch pot. A handful of crushed herbs waits, patient and fragrant, beside a flat wooden board. The first loaves will go to the elders. The next will go to those who rise earliest. the ferryman, the herdsman, the boy who sweeps the temple steps so early he watches bats trade places with swallows. Along the village's eastern edge, the fields begin, orderly as a song learned by heart. Low ridges mark borders where neighbors meet to trade work and jokes. The soil is dark with the memory of last season's flood. It breaks under the hoe into generous clods that crumble at a touch. Oxen pull wooden plows through the damp rows, leaning into their collars with a patience that seems carved from the same wood as the yoke. A woman named Hezet stoops to tuck seedlings into the cool earth. Her hands are quick, brown, capable. Her wrists are bound with faded blue string to keep the sleeves of her linen up from the wet. She sings to the seedlings under her breath, not from superstition but from habit, the way a mother hums while braiding a child's hair. When the sun clears the low line of trees beyond the far fields, it pours over the village with a warmth that is less command than invitation. Lizards appear on the wall tops, trembling with pleasure. A cat arranges itself in a patch of light near a door and pretends indifference to the sparrow picking at a crumb. Smoke rises from dung cakes stacked beside an oven, straight as a prayer. A man climbs to his roof with a jar of pitch and a flat wooden blade. He will mend the reed matting there where last week's wind made a small mischief. In the cool shadow of her small courtyard, a weaver named Satra sits before her upright loom. The warp is stretched taut, pale as straw. Her shuttle is a smooth slip of wood that fits her palm as if it were carved from the memory of her own hand. She feeds the weft through, draws it tight with a comb, feeds it through again. The cloth she is making will be a tunic for her son, though by the time she finishes it he will have grown another finger's width taller, and she will be obliged to add a border to the hem so it will last him until midwinter. This does not bother her. She likes borders. They are where she can play. Satra's loom sings a quiet, repetitive music. Thread, comb, breath, thread, comb, breath. Through the doorway beyond, the river flashes in the thin strip of sky like a coin half buried in sand. The cat from the alley slips into her shade and makes itself a ring at her feet. On the wall, a strip of linen, last year's practice weaving, waits to be turned into bandages or into a wrapping for figs. Nothing here is wasted. Not a scrap of cloth, not a length of twine, not a story told twice to a child who asks for it again because the ending feels friendly. By mid-morning, the market is a pattern of slow gestures. A farmer places onions in pyramids, each green neck laid carefully, the bulbs touching like neighbors in a line. A girl carries a basket of dates and announces the sweetness with a grin that shows the missing tooth she lost last week. Two old friends lean toward one another so their conversation does not have to travel far. Nebu the scribe copies an old hymn at the request of a woman who wants to hang the words above her sleeping place. He writes carefully, the letters like river birds stroking forward one after another, wings hovering between earth and water. On the far side of the square, a traveling peddler rolls out a piece of indigo cloth and sets upon it the 30 small things he has to sell. Pins shaped like fish, beads the color of clouds before rain, combs with carved teeth, a shell from a coast no one in the village has seen. Children crowd near. The peddler tells them how the shell sings, though they can only hear the wind that remembers the singing. He tells them how beads are the crumbs of broken stars. This is not true, but it pleases the children and harms no one. And he tells them the proper way to thank a comb so it will find the patient part in a knot. As the sun climbs, the sheen of heat increases. It does not press. It shimmers, as if the air itself is a river flowing the other way. The sycamore deepens its shade and collects people within it. A woman pours water from a tall jar into a wide bowl, and the water makes its small silver voice as it meets the clay. A boy, sent to fetch coriander, returns with coriander and 3 jokes he was not sent to fetch. The jokes make his mother snort despite herself. She swats the air near his shoulder in a way that is as much blessing as correction. Farther along the bank, near a place where the river slows to admire itself, an elderly man named Hori sits with his feet in the shallows. He is the sort of man the very young and the very old instinctively like. This is not because he speaks unusually well, but because he listens unusually well, nodding as if each thing said to him is a small bird landing briefly on his shoulder. Hori owns 3 things that matter to him: a knife with a blade worn thin, a reed flute with a crack mended neatly with thread, and the names of every star his grandfather taught him. He will trade none of these, not even for a jar of honey and a belt new enough to creak. Children find Hori by following the sound of the flute. He plays the same 6 notes in different orders and makes them say different things. Wake, wait, welcome, wonder, wander, home. When he tires of playing, he tells the sort of stories that never hurry, stories with afternoons in them and low hills and patient animals who teach but do not scold. Today he tells a story about a turtle that decided to race the shade of a cloud. The turtle, wise as a grandmother, did not win. The shade travels faster than feet. But the turtle still reached the river, and reaching the river was always the point. The children nod gravely. They are old enough to understand that not all races are one, and that not all races are meant to be. Near noon, the village softens its pace. Heat becomes a slow bell rung over everything. People pull stools into shade, tilt jars to drink, lower their voices not out of secrecy but out of kindness for the air, which is doing so much work. In the cool interior of the small temple, a caretaker sweeps, and the bristles whisper on the stone floor like a soft rain falling sideways. He pauses to straighten a basket of offerings: figs, barley cakes, a small plate of hair carefully wrapped in linen. And then he opens the door a bit wider so the heavy sweet smell of incense can escape and mingle with the lighter smell of the river. In a courtyard where grapevines have learned the kind of patience that results in fruit, a grandmother and her granddaughter peel garlic together. They sit on low stools facing each other so their hands can meet halfway. The garlic skins drift into a shallow basket like white moths. Between cloves, the grandmother tells the girl how she once saw a lotus open while she was sitting very still, how the flower staged the smallest, quietest celebration, delicate as a sip of water in the middle of a sentence. The girl's eyes widen. She promises to try sitting very still. She does not know yet that stillness is a skill, and like all skills, it takes practice and forgiveness. Mealtime arrives without announcement. Bread broken with the thumb, lentils with coriander, cucumbers sliced thin, olives that carry the memory of last year's sun. A drop of honey slips from the blunt end of a spoon and makes a bright stain on a boy's wrist. He licks it clean with ceremony. Conversation settles into the gentle, unshowy business of weaving a day together. Who met whom in the square, which goat decided to argue with a fence post, how the ferry rope sang at mid-morning because the current was ornery, how the oven wanted a bit more fuel than yesterday, stubborn as an uncle who tells a story twice and insists the second telling is new. After eating, the village hums at a lower pitch. Some nap behind reed screens. Others turn to tasks that welcome stillness. Mending a basket where the rim has pulled, rubbing oil into a wooden stool, sorting seeds into bowls so each kind will be ready to become a future. A boy practices letters in dust with a stick, copying from a slate his aunt made him. He writes the word for boat 3 times, then the word for bird, then the word for bread, then looks up satisfied because together those words are almost a poem. He does not know it is a poem because no one has told him, but poems do not require permission to exist. On the river, Menon the fisherman lifts his net and finds it heavy with an honest portion. Not too much to brag, not so little to worry. He thanks the water aloud because gratitude does not change the size of a catch, but it changes the size of a heart, and that, over time, changes a life. He coils his ropes, ships his oars, and lets the current carry him home while he arranges the morning's thoughts on an invisible shelf inside his head. A bird that skimmed so low its wings wrote a word he almost understood. The way the river showed its teeth briefly where the bank curves. The face of a cloud that reminded him of his sister when she was small and believed a pebble could be a hero. The afternoon lengthens, then deepens, then slowly leans toward evening. Shadows stretch out as if they are telling the ground a secret. A wind arrives from far up country, slips through the fields, runs its fingers through barley like a friend brushing crumbs from a sleeve. The sycamore drops a leaf, just one. No hurry. It is not autumn, only a single decision. The leaf spins, remembers the air, remembers how it learned to hold light, and then it lands without regret beside the heel of a passing dog who does not notice because the dog is thinking about a smell 2 houses ahead and the possibility of a bone there. In Satra, the weaver's courtyard, the cloth has grown by the width of 3 fingers, then 4, then a palm. She stands, stretches her back, and lets her eyes climb the strip of sky to count how much blue remains before dusk. The cat opens one eye, decides this is not a matter requiring a cat's participation, and sleeps another chapter. Seitra's daughter returns from the market with a small bundle wrapped in old linen. A pinch of saffron, a handful of dried mint, 2 tiny clay buttons made by the potter's daughter who is teaching herself to love small things very well. Evening is the village's favorite time. It arrives as if it has been walking all day to get here and is happy to sit. Doors that stood half-closed swing wide. Someone on a roof calls down. The western sky is telling stories, and a few people climb ladders to join him. They watch as the sun steps down the sky in careful sandals, touching each cloud separately as if to thank it for letting the light ride. The river accepts the changing color without fuss. It has worn every color and will wear them all again. A heron lands on the mud flat and stands there like a language waiting to be learned. The first star shows itself, and then, once it has proven courage is possible, others follow. Small fires appear, then the spiral of smoke, then the stories that cannot be told under the busy glare of daylight because the words need a softer air to travel in. Hori the elder takes his flute to the square, but tonight he does not play. He holds it and speaks instead, and when he draws a breath, the flute rises and falls with his chest as if it too is listening. He tells about the year the river climbed onto the road and walked into the wheat and said, "I will be generous, but I am also myself." He tells about the winter 2 cranes chose the temple roof and taught the caretaker that blessings can have long legs and wake early. He tells about a woman who wove a cloth so steady it could not tear even when the wind set its teeth in it, and how the cloth was cut at last not by a blade but by a granddaughter with careful hands who turned the pieces into small bags so everyone could carry a bit of steadfastness at their belts. At the edge of the square, Nebu the scribe is finishing a letter for a man who must travel upriver in the morning. He groans slightly when his knee pops. The man grins and says, "Your joints are also writing a letter." Nebu laughs and sprinkles a pinch of sand to set the ink. He folds the sheet, ties it with a strip of reed, and seals it with a thumbprint pressed into a bead of soft wax. "Give this to the ferryman if you do not find the man yourself," he advises. The ferryman knows how to deliver things to places that are always on the other side. Meals begin again, this time with more voices, because dusk invites the day's words to gather in a bowl and be shared. A pot steams with barley and parsley, with beans soft enough to soothe a complaint that no one has voiced. Someone breaks a pomegranate. The red seeds wink like small embers rescued from a fire. A jug goes around and comes back lighter. A toddler who has escaped every attempt at keeping her hands clean decides to bless the dog with a consultation of sticky fingers. The dog suffers with the dignity of someone who has been, at other times, a king. After eating, people drift. Some to the riverbank to watch the thin line of reflected moon lay itself across the current. Some to rooftops to let their thoughts rise where the air is easiest. Some to courtyards where a loom's last 8 wefts will become the day's last satisfaction. The temple caretaker steps outside and closes the door with a tenderness that looks like a bow. He tips his broom against the wall as if the broom has earned rest and not merely been set aside. Night finds the village ready. Beds are simple, wood frames if luck has been kind, pallets of straw if luck has simply been itself. Blankets smell of sun because they were aired this morning on rooflines. A mother hums, and her song is older than language. A boy lies on his back and tries to decide whether the first star he saw is the same as the first star he sees now. An old dog circles twice, chooses the cool stone by the door, and exhales an entire day in one long sentence that ends in sleep. The river speaks a little louder in darkness. It tells the banks what edges mean, and tells the fish what depths mean, and tells the moon it can carry anything handed to it, even a mirror. Frogs take up posts and announce themselves to one another as if they are officials with good news. An owl travels the same path twice to be sure it was worth traveling. Breeze slides along the reed beds, blowing softly on the village the way a friend blows on a cup to cool it. In Seitra's house, the loom stands like a friendly tall guest. The cat, which has followed the day from one comfortable place to another, steps onto the still warm warp, curls into a comma, and dreams whatever cats dream when their whiskers twitch and their paws move as if they are walking exactly where they intended. Saitra sets a cover over the shuttle, tucks the comb beneath, and runs her palm along the edge of the cloth with a gratitude that does not need words. She will sleep soon. The day's threads have been tied off neatly. The night's threads will tie themselves. And because this is a village that believes time is shaped like a basket, with many weavings crossing each other gently, the night will not be one long dark. It will be, as nights have always been before loud lamps and louder clocks, a pair of rests with a small door between them. After a first sleep, some people will rise when the moon tilts just so, to sit beside their doors, to think small thoughts that do not show themselves in daylight, to share a little bread with a neighbor, to check the oven's gentle heart, to tell the river, "We see you still," and to let their own thoughts drift like boats on short lines. Then, satisfied and a little more at peace than they were, they will lie down again for the second sleep, which is the sleep of fields after rain. But for now, the first sleep begins. The village settles like a hand closing softly. The last talker yields to the last listener. The last ember gives a last orange blink like a wink to whoever cares to catch it. The stars arrange themselves into old stories that the sky remembers even when no one points. The river carries the moon carries the dark carries the houses carry their people, and the people carry their dreams. Lightly, as if each dream is a small bowl of water filled to the brim. Men who rose before dawn to unroll nets rest with their arms loose. The ache in their shoulders soften to a pleasant knowledge of work well done. Women whose hands shaped dough and turned jars and counted seeds sleep with their fingers slightly curled, as if cradling something delicate even in rest. Children sleep in the rough star shapes of those who trust that morning remains in the world, that bread will again become scent, that reeds will again whisper. The cat sleeps, having earned nothing and owing nothing, perfectly at home in a body perfected by practice. And the river, ancient and tireless, continues its patient lesson. Move and be moved. Carry and be carried. Shine and be shone upon. If it dreams, no one knows. If it remembers, everyone suspects. Its voice is the same voice that soothed the earliest sleepers, the same voice that will speak to those who come later, when different hands pull different nets and different words are written with different pens. Says only this in a tongue older than names. Rest. And the village, obedient in the most beautiful way, does. Sometime in the mild center of the night, when even the frogs have paused to listen to nothing at all, an old woman wakes. Not because of worry and not because of pain those visit on other nights, but because her body remembers the doorway between sleeps and enjoys stepping through, the way one might step out onto a cool threshold to look at stars. She sits, wraps a shawl around her shoulders, and opens her door the width of her palm. Air kisses her forehead. She smells damp clay cooling, and the faint spice of someone's forgotten sprig of mint, and smoke the temperature of memory. She does not light a lamp. She pours a finger of water into a small cup and sips it like a secret. Across the lane, the temple door is a dark rectangle. Above it, the sky is a vault of certainty. The stars have not misplaced themselves. The river has not reversed. The reed beds have not uprooted themselves to wander. Her heart, lately too quick in the afternoons, keeps time with the water on the stones. She breathes and listens and lets the door between sleeps do its good work. Open, then close. Before she returns to her mat, she picks up a scrap of linen and a needle already threaded. In 3 small stitches, nothing fancy, only faithful. She closes a seam on a small bag that will hold a child's pebbles or a boy's sentence or a man's pinch of salt for the long walk upriver. She knots the thread and bites the end and smiles because even the night accepts a little mending. Then she lies down, and the second sleep comes for her like a friend who has walked a long way and is pleased to find the door unlatched. Toward morning, the dark grows thin at its edges, as if time is a cloth and the day has begun to press its thumb against it from the other side. Roosters, untroubled by philosophy, announce what they know. The river's voice changes slightly, taking on a brightness that has nothing to do with light and everything to do with possibility. A potter wakes and thinks of a cup whose lip was not quite right. In his mind he turns it until he knows how to make it generous. A herdsman turns in his sleep and dreams the soft, rhythmic rush of hooves in barley. A child, still sealed in warmth, floats in a place where all doors are open and all roads end at a mother's hand. When the first true strand of dawn is drawn across the reed roofs, the village breathes in. Somewhere a small bell rings for no official reason. Its sound is only a punctuation mark at the end of the night's last sentence. The old woman opens her door and laughs softly at the thin gooseflesh on her forearms. Saitra the weaver reaches for the comb at the loom and does not yet use it. She simply likes the weight in her palm. Menon the fisherman wipes the sleep from his eyes with the back of a hand that smells of river and rope and a little of smoke. Nebu the scribe dreams one last dream of letters arranging themselves without ink, and when he wakes he will not remember it clearly, but his hand will feel quick, as if the dream taught it something. Light rests on the river like a blessing that never had to be earned. Birds rehearse the same argument about who owns which branch, reach no conclusion, and enjoy the argument anyway. The sycamore, who has known more dawns than the potter has known glazes, lifts its leaves as if to gather the brightness into a bowl. Someone yawns, and the yawn travels the lane and turns at the corner and enters a house and climbs a ladder and becomes another yawn. This is how some contagions are welcome. The village stands, stretches, and begins again, because that is what villages do. Wake, work, watch, wonder, weave. The river keeps its promise to move and to be moved. The sky keeps its promise to open and to close. The fields keep their promise to answer hands with harvest. And the people keep their promise to one another to share bread and shade and stories and sorrows and the long, slow kindness that makes a place into a home. Here, where dawn returns like a familiar traveler, the day begins the way all good days begin, with water poured into a clay cup, with bread warmed on the wall of an oven, with a child's bare feet on cool stone, with the rustle of reeds telling the wind that it is welcome, and with the steady, almost secret certainty that night will come again, and between first sleep and second, a small, lantern-lit door will open, and our story will step through it to continue. The morning has stretched itself fully awake, and by now the village wears the day like a well-fitted cloak. Sun slips down whitewashed walls and opens tiny opals in every dew bead. Clay jars warm on thresholds. Fig leaves tremble as if they remember some story the wind told them in the night and are eager to retell it. The fields beyond the low stone fences darken where water runs. The earth drinks greedily, then gives back a faint earthen perfume, cool, mineral, trustworthy. Down by the river, the fisherman lifts a net and water ribbons away from it in silver threads. He hums without thinking, a tune he learned from his father and that his father learned from a boat plank creaking, or maybe from the river herself when she is in a generous mood. Little fish flick in the stretched mesh, quick commas rewriting the surface of the day. He thanks them in a whisper and moves with deliberate care, as though the air is a fragile thing that must not be bruised. On the slope above the bank, the dye-maker spreads lengths of linen across smooth poles. Madder has given one cloth a gentle rust, woad has given another the memory of distance, and onion skins have left a quiet gold that the sun approves. When a breeze arrives, the cloths breathe together like the chests of sleepers. Lift, settle, lift again. The dye-maker's daughter pats each piece flat with a palm as patient as rain, then turns to shoo a hen who wishes to know whether fabric is good to peck. The hen decides it is not, and her quick feet write nonsense poems in the dust. At the market, the potter's apprentice centers clay with the full attention of someone who has discovered that a soft thing can have a spine. Her thumbs make a valley. Her fingers make a hill. The wheel offers time in circles. The master watches without watching, giving the silence a chance to teach. The pot grows a neck, then a lip, then the sort of roundness that suggests it will remember water kindly. She slows the wheel with a touch that counts as a blessing. When she lifts the jar away, her hands remain curved a moment longer, as if holding invisible weight. Toward noon, the streets retreat into shade. Doorways fill with baskets. Cucumbers glistening as though newly rained, figs whose skins have begun to crack with sweetness, terracotta flasks stoppered with wax. The baker drags a broad paddle from the mouth of the oven and clouds of fragrance rush out to greet the waiting loaves, bran brown, wheat pale, a few seated with poppy for celebration and satires. He thumps the bottom of one, listens for the hollow note that means the crumb will be tender. In another corner, a woman fans a brazier and roasts chickpeas until they sing the language of the pan. Children herd shadows. They chase the narrow ships of swallows that cleave the air. A boy rolls a hoop and listens to it tell the cobbles what they already know. The day runs, but not away. It runs toward itself, one street at a time. An old woman rests on a stool and breaks soft bread into a bowl of oil speckled with thyme. She dips, eats, dips again, then presses a morsel into the hand of a passing child as though feeding a small and very present future. By the canal, the washers lay linen on bright stones. White on gray, it looks like snow practicing its arrival. They beat the cloth in an easy rhythm and gossip in a separate rhythm, and somewhere the two rhythms braid themselves into a song. One woman speaks a prayer not to be overheard. No emergency, no bargain, only the soft acknowledgement that a day is heavy enough to carry meaning and light enough to carry laughter. The road beyond the last house becomes a line stitched through wheat and barley. A donkey walks there, ears performing small theatrics with every insect. His load is careful. A basket of greens, a jar of brined olives, a second jar of stories the driver will tell tonight if anyone asks properly. Beside the road, a shrine holds a candle that has finished its work. A curl of smoke rises, points, then erases its own direction. Someone will light another flame at dusk. It is an agreement the village keeps with the dark. In the low field where the soil holds last winter's memory, a man leans on his hoe and studies weather, which is to say he studies the undersides of leaves, the width of distant light, the language of the horizon. His daughter follows with a small sack of seed. She is solemn, the way one is solemn when one has been entrusted with very tiny lives. She sets each promise in its appointed place, pats the earth closed above it, and moves on, tugged forward by the thin silver chain of imagination. Bread, soup, a winter that will allow the telling of better winter stories. Closer to town, a scribe sits under the little fig that is determined to grow toward the street instead of toward the orchard. He repairs a binding with linen thread and hums the same line the fisherman hummed because some melodies belong to places as much as to people. From time to time he looks up and smiles at nothing. In truth, he smiles at everything. The day's long bell, neither early nor late, only inevitable, passes over roofs and courtyards. It doesn't call, it allows. People find themselves drifting to the places where their work temporarily ends and their rest temporarily begins. In one shaded yard, a family assembles at a low table. Flatbread freckled with oven kisses, a bowl of lentils thickened with garlic, cucumbers arranged like green moons, a dish of sheep's cheese so simple that all complexity bows. The grandmother pours oil with the gravity of a priest and murmurs a blessing that is also a recipe and also a memory and also a map. After the meal, the talk lengthens. A story arrives and sits among them. About a year when the river withdrew and left behind a puzzle of sandbars. About a black dog who learned to fetch dropped sandals. About a man who dreamed his roof collapsed and woke to find the thatch stronger than ever. The small boy listening to this last one nods with satisfaction. He likes stories that repair what they threaten. The old man who tells it pretends not to notice the nod. He finishes with a line that the boy will become old enough to understand years from now and will then pretend not to notice in another child. Heat loosens its hold. The dye cloths are lifted from their poles like prayers collected by careful hands. In the little square, a musician arrives with a harp, another with a drum, a third with a flute that remembers reeds. They tune without haste, choose a melody that does not disturb anyone's thoughts, and set it afloat. The tune wanders as a river wanders, not toward drama, but toward a wider, gentler version of itself. People pass by and keep walking because there is nowhere to go that music is not already heading. The temple keeper sweeps the vestibule with a branch broom and rearranges the offerings. Flowers that have shed, fruit that has softened, coins that have accumulated tiny decisions. The walls keep their painted stories at a respectful glow in the late light. A figure pouring water, a figure carrying bread, a figure lifting a lamp. He replaces the lamp oil, replaces the wicks, replaces nothing that isn't ready to become new. When he steps back, the air around the altar is indistinguishable from attention. Evening advances on the soft sols of habit. Kitchen doors receive bowls, and bowls receive steam, and steam receives a cinnamon edge that turns the corner and finds a neighbor reading at his threshold. He inhales and reads the same line again for the pleasure of adding that flavor to the sentence. Children flock toward the river as if the day is a kite they can bring down with whoops. A mother shakes a rug and the sun catches 1,000 small bright planets in the dust before they sail away. From the road beyond the mill, 2 travelers appear. A woman with a shawl the color of the first sky after rain, and a man carrying a bag that keeps telling his shoulder it knows what weight is. They have been walking a good while and have learned not to argue with the distance. The inn is ahead, its sign creaking, N or crossed with a sprig of rosemary. Its yard swept, its windows throwing the sort of light that looks both appetizing and forgiving. Inside, benches stand at a polite angle to the hearth. The keeper turns with a welcome already on his tongue. The travelers smile as if a door has opened in their bones. They will share a bed, because that is what travelers do in this century, in this valley, in this in whose boards are clean and whose straw has been shaken so recently that the loft still feels like an orchard. A quiet man already occupies one side, hands folded on the blanket in a saint's parody. He nods without surprise. 2 more bodies mean 2 more sources of warmth between the midnight and the morning, and warmth has a way of telling the same truth as kindness. The innkeeper brings bowls of stew and sets them down with the care some reserve for relics. Carrots sweeten the air. Barley confesses it has absorbed a secret from the pot. The travelers do not remember their last spoonful. That is how hunger and hospitality combine to erase arithmetic. When the bowls are bare, cups appear with something comforting inside. The innkeeper mentions the hour of the watch between sleeps, as if it were an old friend who might visit and sit on the bed's footboard and say nothing and yet improve the conversation. Everyone nods. Of course. First sleep, the watch, second sleep. This is the order of the night as bread is the order of the day. Outside, lamps go up like small moons that have chosen to live nearer the ground. A cobbler adjusts a wick with a nail and the flame's voice clears its throat. A pleasant, unthreatening murmur. In a courtyard, 2 women retrieve blankets from a line and tug them straight with a satisfaction that looks, in this light, as holy as anything occurring in the temple. Unrolled mattresses breathe straw. Where there are frames, ropes are tightened under, over, until the lattice is a quiet drum that will hold the body the way a sentence holds a thought. The nightcap comes out of the chest. It is not a joke. It is a small roof for the head. Wool for winter, linen for summer, an undecided mix for the months that can't choose. A child tugs his over his ears and announces he is a monk who mustn't laugh. He then laughs, because the vow is ceremonial and the night itself is gentle. A woman oils her hands and rubs her husband's shoulders with a pressure that says 2 things at once. The day was long. The night will be ours. Above them, the canopy muses on drafts. On a peg, a rosary keeps time for a prayer not yet spoken. Somewhere, a bell marks Compline. The sound doesn't command. It suggests. In the monastery beyond the eastern hedges, sandals make their careful way along a corridor worn familiar by so many feet that the stones have learned to anticipate them. The chapel holds darkness the way a palm holds water. Candles lift the darkness delicately. No spilling. The brothers sing. Their voices don't so much ascend as settle into their appointed layer of air. They file back to the dormitory afterward without commentary, because at this hour words would be redundancies. Each finds his plank, his pallet, his folded cloak. The room becomes a field of small roofs rising and falling. In one cottage near the mill race, a mother adds a log to the hearth and closes the iron with a hush. The baby on her shoulder sighs and becomes heavier, an ancient sign that the door to sleep has opened. She lays the child down in the family bed, then slides in herself. The older boy is already there crosswise, and the dog has decided the boy's knees are a coastline of great interest. The mother accepts all of this as weather and collects them gently with the blanket. When her husband arrives from the shed where he has been mending the hinge that told him it could use mending, he lifts the boy by the ankles and turns him lengthwise without waking him, a trick taught to him by an uncle who could also pick pears by touch in the dark. First sleep comes like a tide, not abruptly, Not in a single, showy wave. It climbs the ankles, then the calves. It makes the knees idea-free. It whispers to the hips the old story about letting go. On the roof, the last heat of the day lifts into the night and joins the company of crickets. The house settles. In the inn, the travelers turn toward the wall and away from it and toward it again, choosing the best acquaintance for their ribs. The quiet man on the outer edge has already departed toward the deeper rooms of the night, taking with him the faintest smile, which he seems to have packed for just such journeys. Dreams arrive modest at first, not revelations, mere inventories that the mind performs out of courtesy. 3 baskets of beans, the wheel needs oil. Tell Tomas to fetch the foal from the orchard before someone decides it lives there. The inn's rafters remember ship ribs, and so the sleep within them rocks a little. And so the dreams of those beneath include voyages that will never happen but feel very much like coming home. When the watch wakes the village, now a bell, now a body sensing itself finished with one chapter. A great many eyes open without fear. This is not failure. This is the custom. The mother touches the baby's back and is comforted by the rising and falling. The old woman on her stool in the small room off the courtyard lights a taper and reads a psalm that addresses God as if he were a neighbor who would lean on the half-door to answer, and would answer in weather. 2 brothers in the dormitory sit up to keep from sliding into dangerous dreams. They wrap their cloaks around their shoulders and say very little to each other and are companionable exactly to that degree. It is the hour for small labors and holy conjectures. In the miller's house, the man goes out with a lantern to check the sluice. The water is where the water should be, which is seldom true in stories but frequently true in the discipline of night. In a stable, a girl strokes the muzzle of a mare that has decided that the dark means loneliness. She whispers scandalous compliments into the soft ear. Noblest, wisest, most beautiful. A moon who has become a horse for our amazement. The mare agrees to stand quietly until sleep returns to her bones. Some houses choose tenderness. A husband and wife discover that the body after 4 hours of rest is kind, and that the kindness makes room for a conversation that is not only in words. The straw is obliging. The canopy holds its breath. On the neighbor's fence, a cat decides the hour is for its own liturgy and praises the moon with a hymn that is not entirely tuneful. No one is offended. Other houses choose bread. A woman mixes dough with hands that seem to keep their own counsel of recipes. She presses her knuckles into the soft mass, folds, turns, folds again, the rhythm old as the abandonment of wandering. The dough believes her and relaxes into fermentation. She will wake the house with it in the morning and stand out of the way as the day devours the first loaf with butter and thanks. Some use the watch to mend things that do not complain in daylight. A net whose patience has begun to look like resignation. A hem that would prefer not to reveal too much ankle. A toy carved from willow that would be better at pretending to be a horse if it had an extra ear. In the inn, the quiet man tells the woman with the rain-sky shawl about a saint who slept sitting up to deter certain dreams, and she tells him in return about her aunt who slept flat on her back so as not to confuse angels come to measure her. And between the two, a sensible middle path opens like a road in a field, and they laugh softly so the third sleeper will not think himself alone. Nightcaps are straightened, coifs are loosened. A stray spark in one cottage is pinched between fingers and rebuked in a whisper gentle as snow. A mother draws her cloak about her shoulders and steps into the yard to look at the sky. There it is, the perfection that insists on being ordinary. She names the lights not by their astronomy but by their promises. That one for rain, though not too much. That one for the safe return of her brother. That one for silence. That one for bread. If you were to walk the lane now, you would meet night as a citizen, not a foreigner. Doors ajar for air, the murmur of a psalm, the soft punctuation of someone drinking from a cup, a laugh caught and made small by prudence, the odd gentle argument with a rooster who has misunderstood the moon. There is fear, yes, there is always fear, as there is always salt, but it has been offered a chair and a bowl of stew and asked to explain itself, and in explaining itself it becomes tired and nods and lets the hour move on. Dreams in the second sleep are different. They have washed their faces in the watch and returned wiser. A boy rides a pig through a field of reeds and everyone cheers because the pig has remembered the way home. A widow meets her husband at a table and they eat pears and do not talk about death because death is asleep on the hearthrug and snoring and cannot be wakened. A monk finds himself in the middle of a psalm with no memory of how it began and understands that a psalm and a river are sometimes the same. Far away or near, it is hard to tell in the night, thunder rehearses. The air quivers in approval. In the barn, sheep consider their options and choose to huddle into a philosophy. A dog opens one eye and offers an opinion withheld. Rain arrives politely, then with persuasion. Roofs answer by being roofs. In the monastery, the dormitory breathes more deeply, as though the bellies of the beds themselves have become living. A novice thinks of the order's rule, of humility, of obedience, of stability. He turns on his side and decides that stability is a pillow he intends to keep. By the time the storm moves on, it has swept the village with a broom of water, and every surface glows the way a thought glows when it finally finds its word. The last hour before sunrise gathers itself behind the hills like a shy child deciding whether to enter the room. In that hour, everything is honest. The sore shoulder admits its ache and promises to improve. The regret admits its lesson and becomes less gaudy. The hope admits it is hope and becomes lighter to carry. Cocks preface the bell. They are not unanimous. Some argue for a later dawn. Others are eager to impress the light with their reliability. The bell resists both extremes and speaks when it means to. In the first house where the sound touches the lintel, a girl reaches for her nightcap's tassel and discovers she has slept without it. She is surprised at her bravery and decides she will try it again when the weather and her courage coincide. In the inn, the travelers open their eyes and remember where they are with gratitude. Plenty of nights ask the mind to perform cartography. This one presents a map already folded to the proper page. The mother sits up and the baby turns toward her in a movement as old as migration. She lifts him and the smell of milk, warm as a secret kept by a friend, fills the bed. She is tired and content, which is a marriage that never ends in divorce. Her husband slides from the blanket, sets the kettle near the coals with the economy of someone who has learned not to lift what can be slid, and goes to the door to greet a weather he did not prepare but has decided to deserve. Light begins in the east in the ordinary way. First an argument, then a persuasion, then a triumph that insists it was never in doubt. Roofs remember their thatch lines. Windows practice transparency. Cats decide to forgive. The road resumes being a road, not a speculation. Smoke rises from the first chimneys and writes to the birds. You may come. They come. The monastery is deliberate. The brothers fold their blankets as though returning favors. A senior smiles at a novice who has drooled on his sleeve. The novice is mortified. The senior pats his shoulder as one pats a loaf that has risen with enthusiasm. In the refectory, bowls wait. In the kitchen, a pan considers porridge and commits to it. The day's psalms line up on the shelf of duty and look well shined. In the market, shutters lift, and the square reveals the footprints of last night's rain as if they were another kind of commerce. The dye-maker runs a hand along the cloths which now smell faintly of thunder and very faintly of violets, though no violets were used. The potter inspects yesterday's jars, tapping each to hear if it believes it has become hollow enough to be useful. A child sits cross-legged and ties a string to the leg of a wooden bird. He will fly it until the string knots the afternoon into a kite. Bread returns from the oven. The crusts and the bell compete for the title of most convincing announcement of morning. It is a draw. People buy loaves with the reverence of practical liturgy. Coins exchange palms. Purses become lighter in a way that pleases them. The baker's boy flower masks his nose and sneezes and laughs at his own good fortune. To sneeze in a room where even the air is food. The day expands, and with it the memory of the night remains in everyone like a small warm stone in a pocket. First sleep, the watch, second sleep, the check on the fire, the touch on the shoulder, the rain rehearsing, debuting, bowing. The dream in which someone long gone remembered your name without strain. Whatever the day decides to do with its hours, the night has already done with them the one thing that matters. It has knit, and where it has not knit it has placed the needle and threaded it for you. By late morning, a troop of pilgrims pauses beneath the sycamore. Their road dust has conspired with their stories. Both are thick. One woman unrolls a length of blank parchment and asks the scribe to write a letter she will never send and only carry. A letter addressed to a city she has not reached and to a person she has not met, composed of the names of rivers crossed and kindnesses received. He writes, and with each line the parchment seems to become not heavier but more able to be borne. In another lane, the herb seller's stall answers questions. Something for a cough. Something for sorrow that has insisted on being called by a different name. Something for a man who wakes in the watch and worries his goats are counting him, not the other way around. She offers time for the cough, metasweet for the sorrow, and for the man with goats she suggests a stronger latch and a weaker imagination, then laughs and adds a sachet of lavender to place beneath his pillow, because even common sense respects perfume. Midday again. The way birds occupy it is different from morning, less acquisition, more inspection. A kite rides a thermal until the thermal forgets its own up and hands the bird back to gravity with courtesy. Children invent a game with a stone and a circle and rules that change when the circle is moved, which means the game is more philosophy than sport, and so they win, then lose, then declare that leaving for lunch is not defeat but intermission. Heat collects. The houses close their eyes. The streets yawn and become quieter. On a bench under the fig, the old storyteller returns to his work, which is to tend the border between the true and the never quite true but useful. He speaks of how people once slept in halves and met between them for prayer or stew or kisses or repairs. How the watch made space for a person to be both guardian and guest in his own life. The children lean, adults pretend not to lean. A woman, listening from a doorway, decides to put aside her mending for the night and write a letter to her sister instead. A letter that needs the watch to find its shape. Toward afternoon, a wind arrives tired from traveling. It sits on the hill for a minute, then comes down among the houses and rearranges nothing but people's thoughts. The dye maker brings in the last cloth. The potter pinches a lip smoother. A boy returns a book to the scribe and forgets to ask for another, because his mind has gone walking without him to consider a sentence that feels like a door opening in a wall he hadn't known he had built. At the inn, the travelers are helping the keeper tighten bed ropes. Sleep is a guest and deserves a well-strung chair. They talk about roads, not to compare distances but to compare songs heard along them. They tally the bells of towns, which is like counting the ways a sky becomes evening. The quiet man shows them a trick for folding a cloak to make a better pillow. They insist this is wizardry. He admits that the only magic he knows is gratitude and a good diagonal. Evening begins to paint with long, slow strokes. The first bat draws cursive across a page of fading blue. House by house, flame answers dusk. A jar of olives is opened with a promise that tomorrow there will still be olives. Someone begins a tune on the old harp. A child thumps a pot at roughly the same tempo because collaboration is God's favorite form of chaos. The temple lamp is trimmed again. A widow places a coin in the bowl and says her husband's name aloud for the first time today. The sound is a kind of bread she tears and eats. The keeper nods as if handed a message from a friend he also misses. The coin gleams. The flame agrees to be thinner but not smaller. The last water of the day spills from the last pitcher into the last basin. The streets darken as though informed of some formal decree. The night remembers how to be night. Beds open their arms. The watch waits in the wings. And again, first sleep. The body, practiced, finds the doorway and steps through without fumbling at the latch. Houses surrender their outlines and become simply shelter. A traveling dog curls on the inn's hearth and dreams of smells he has yet to smell. In the monastery, the snore of a single brother rises like a modest tower and then, as if embarrassed by its own architecture, descends. Between sleeps, the village gathers itself softly. A boy wakes to a quiet hunger and dips a crust in yesterday's stew. It tastes of patience, which is better than salt. His mother, not quite waking, adjusts the blanket to cover his feet and the future. The rain-sky shawl traveler sits on the sill and writes, "We woke in the middle and it wasn't the middle at all. It was a bridge." She pauses, listens to the inn's rafters, hears ship ribs again, and adds a sentence she didn't know she had been waiting to write. A seamstress unthreads something that wasn't ready to be sewn and threads it again with a calmer light. A farmer warms his hands around a mug and considers the stubborn field as a conversation partner rather than an adversary. A monk kneels by his plank and discovers that gratitude spoken at this hour is a language his mouth loves. Then second sleep. The mender of nets dreams of a net that catches moonlight and releases fish. The dye maker dreams of a cloth that keeps the exact smell of rain. The scribe dreams of writing a name and the name writing him back. The village becomes a single lung. Inhale, the roofs rise. Exhale, the beasts settle. Inhale. The crickets are a choir rehearsing not to perform but to remember how. At last, the thin gray that precedes day drifts down the lanes. A rooster who has misread clocks his entire life makes a brave announcement and is forgiven. The bell wakes more gently than any hand. In the inn, the travelers lift themselves from sleep like letters lifting from a page. The quiet man smiles the first smile of the day. It looks very much like the last smile of the night, which means he has slept well. Doors open. Buckets go for water. The first loaf cracks when tapped. A little girl, hair unpractical and full of stars that have somehow become tangles, runs to tell her mother that she dreamed she was a lantern. Her mother tells her that she still is. The girl believes it immediately and forever. So the day begins again and the village with it. And what the night taught. The twofold rhythm, the watchful kindness, the mending and the blessing, travels forward in every footstep, as bread travels forward in every hand that tears it, as river travels forward in every jar that carries it home. The sun climbs, the fields answer, the dye dries, the pot cools, the bell waits for its hour. And you, listening, may keep what you please from this long, soft telling. A cap to warm the head of your sleep, a rope bed retightened, a dream remembered not for its plot but for its balm, a bell that says only, it is time for rest, and then later, kindly, it is time for light. The winter that wrapped itself around Salem village in 1692 had the cold patience of a sermon. Snow stacked against fence rails and crept like doubt beneath doors. The fields slept, the orchards clutched their own ribs, and inside timber-framed houses, breath made small ghosts in the air. The people were God-fearing and exhausted. Poor harvests, old quarrels, new taxes, the constant ache of distance from the mother country, and the nearer ache of neighbors who would not yield an inch. When the ground freezes long enough, it's easy to imagine the heart does too. In the parsonage at the edge of the village, Reverend Samuel Parris kept a fire grudgingly fed. He was a man of fragile authority and anxious piety, more inclined to locks than to ladders. His daughter Betty, 9 years old, had a laugh like summer water when it was allowed out. His niece Abigail Williams, 11, could speak a truth like a flint strike spark. The parsonage held other lives as well. Paris's enslaved woman, Tituba, who knew songs from the islands and stories that bent like palms in a trade wind, and Tituba's husband, John Indian, whose name the village used as though it were a fact about the land and not a choice men had made. January cracked through the village with its old hinge. The girls began to behave strangely. They fell silent as stones, then screamed as though the house were being unbuilt around them. They froze in attitudes of prayer, then clawed at chair legs as though being dragged by invisible hands. They spoke words as if their tongues remembered a language they had not learned. Their bodies arched, their fingers pointed, their eyes fixed on the corner where a broom leaned, as though the broom had recited scripture poorly and deserved correction. The town gathered its dread into baskets and carried it to Paris's door. A doctor came, William Griggs, who owned more confidence than cures. He watched the girls jerk and weep, listened to their small chests heave, peered into their eyes, and finally, when his own instruments returned nothing he could name, he pronounced the diagnosis that fit the village better than any medicine: witchcraft. It was a word with iron in it, a word that made a room colder even with the fire high, a word that could turn suspicion into policy in the time it takes a bell to speak. Witchcraft. In a place where Satan was not a metaphor but a neighbor, where dreams were reports and omens were the undertext of weather, the accusation did not sound extravagant. It sounded like an explanation that tidied the table. The girls, fearful and strangely powerful, were asked to name the hands that pinched them when no one stood near. Names came, as names will, especially when adults lean forward with belief like a net. First, the usual suspects, women on the edges of the village's patience. Sarah Goodpour, sharp-tongued, a beggar whose pipe smoke and muttered refusals had been read as curses. Sarah Osborne, sickly, litigious, scandalous for marrying the man who had once been her indentured servant. She had kept to her bed and to her stubborn property. And Tituba, foreign to New England twice over by color and by story. When the constables fetched them, the village felt the bitter relief of having a shape to its fear. The examinations were theater with God as the audience and men as the stage managers. In the meeting house, under rafters that had heard better sermons, the magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin sat like conclusion carved into chairs. The afflicted girls convulsed whenever a suspect entered, the way iron filings leap to meet a magnet. Their breathing became arguments. Their limbs made hieroglyphs of pain. The magistrates asked questions that were not questions at all. Why do you hurt these children? And the women answered with the truth, which did not look like truth in that room. Sarah Good insisted she had no pact with the devil. She had barely succeeded in making a pact with any baker to give her yesterday's bread. Sarah Osborne, pale as parchment, denied and denied until denial itself looked like obstinacy. Tituba watched the space between the magistrates and the girl writhing on the floor and calculated the distance between survival and the people who had purchased her. When they beat her, or promised a beating, or promised relief from one if she would only agree with the script, she did what women have done in too many rooms with too many doors sealed. She told them a story they would believe. Yes, there were witches, she said, because that is what they wished to be true. Yes, a tall man in black, yes, a book with many names, yes, animals that spoke and familiars that licked blood. But there were others, she said, more witches, many witches, not merely herself. If terror is a fire, this was the bellows. Her confession did not end the fever. It fed it. It formed a ladder for the magistrates to climb, and from the higher rung the village looked like a field where enemies hid in wheat. Fear learned how to multiply. In the days that followed, accusation flowered like mold in a damp winter. Mercy Lewis and Putnam Jr., Mary Walcott, and other afflicted girls named and named and named. The names ran through the village genealogy like cracks in ice. Respectable matrons, elderly saints, midwives, wives of men who voted the wrong way or moved fences the wrong direction or refused to lend a scythe and then forgot to apologize for being right. Resentments put on Sabbath clothes and took the stand. Old boundary disputes rehearsed themselves as spectral assaults. If butter would not churn or a cow slipped its calf, the devil learned a fresh address. Bridget Bishop was brought in. She wore bright clothes and a life too loud for Puritan comfort. Susanna Martin, who laughed easily and did not curtsy to men's certainty. Rebecca Nurse, old and pious, a woman whose prayers had grown a shape and might have been mistaken for furniture. When her indictment was read, many gasped. Even the jury hesitated and returned a verdict of not guilty, until the afflicted renewed their fits with such eloquence that the verdict reversed like a coat turned inside out. It is not only facts that persuade. Spectacle is a sermon too. By June, Governor Sir William Phipps, eager for a method, established a special court in Salem town, the Court of Oyer and Terminer, to hear and determine. It learned to hear what could not be heard and to determine what could not be touched. Spectral evidence, the report that an accused person's spirit tormented a victim, was admitted as though dreams were affidavits and imagination the sworn word of a constable. In English law there had always been a place for wonder. In Salem, wonder took the witness stand and swore against its neighbors. The first to die was Bridget Bishop, June 10, 1692. She stood at Gallows Hill under a sky that had not been asked its opinion. She said she was innocent. She said it with the weary exactness of a woman who has said true things in rooms where no one wanted them. The cart rolled. The rope obeyed gravity. The crowd made that particular hush human beings make when fear is satisfied and shame not yet arrived. Afterward, the onlookers went to supper as though the world had been put straight. It had not. The gallows learned efficiency. On July 19th, 5 women: Sarah Good, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, Sarah Wilds, Rebecca Nurse. Sarah Good's last words to her judge carried the precision of a blade. "You are a liar. I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." A curse, they called it. A summation, really, of how justice had been mislaid. August brought more deaths. September, the worst of it, 8 hanged in a single day. Giles Corey, 81 and granite in both name and temperament, refused to plead and thus refused the court its appetite. The law answered with pain forte et dur, pressing. Stones stacked upon a chest until confession or death. More weight, he croaked, not as bravado but as indictment. If the court wanted gravity, he would give them gravity until they learned what it meant. While the condemned climbed the ladder, the jails swelled with the accused. Boston, Ipswich, Salem, stone rooms, iron shackles, straw that refused to become cleaner by hoping. Babies were born there. At least 5 prisoners died there before judgment could find them. The colony charged the jailed for their keep. Imagine paying for the privilege of surviving. The trials were theater, and in theater, roles matter. The afflicted girls were central children who had been invisible in the economy of adult righteousness now had the power to bring men to their knees. Their bodies wrote the script in convulsion, in shriek, in the particular eloquence of fainting. Some believed them. Some suspected performance. Many did not trust themselves to decide. To doubt a child's suffering is a moral hazard in any century. To doubt it in Salem was to invite the devil to supper. But belief has edges, and sometimes those edges cut. Through it all, whispers of doubt threaded the noise. A few ministers, including Increase Mather and, cautiously, his son Cotton, began to question the reliance on spectral testimony. It were better, Increase would soon write, that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. That sentence, which now sounds obvious, had to push its way past fear as if fear were a door barred from within by the furniture of panic. Then came those moments that will not behave and so change everything. On August 19th, the Reverend George Burroughs, once minister in Salem Village, a small man with a good memory and a complicated history, stood on the ladder and, in a voice clear as water, recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly. It was commonly held that a witch could not do so. The crowd wavered as faith wavers when it meets fact. Some said the devil had taught him the words. Others felt the floor of certainty tilt underfoot. When the accusation touched Mary Phipps, the governor's own wife, the weather changed. A net that can snare a governor's household is either very just or very indiscriminate. Phipps decided it was the latter. In October, he dissolved the Court of Oyer and Terminer. A new court, the Superior Court of Judicature, assembled in early 1693 and, crucially, refused spectral evidence. Without the theater of spirits, the stage fell quiet. Of 56 cases, most ended in acquittal or discharge. The panic had burned itself down to ash that even fear could not reignite. Slowly, the jail doors unlatched. Some prisoners were freed. Some remained until debts for their chains were paid. Some were too sick to leave and slipped away before the snow was done. The colony began to perform its slow repentance. Juries recanted. Magistrates found the eloquence of regret. Samuel Sewall, one of the judges, stood in Meeting House in 1697 while a minister read his statement of sorrow and petitioned to God for pardon. It did not resurrect anyone. It did teach a lesson some would carry into law. Families petitioned for restitution. In 1711, the General Court reversed the convictions for many and offered compensation, a sum insufficient in mathematics and in theology. Others were left out and would not be cleared for centuries. Gallows Hill received no monument then. The town resisted memory as one resists cold by pretending to be a different season. Salem Village would later take the name Danvers as if names could unlearn blood. And the girls? Some married and left. Some apologized. In 1706, and Putnam Jr., 26 and chastened by the shape of her own history, stood before her congregation and asked forgiveness for being deluded by Satan. The words felt heavy even in the mouth that shaped them. Forgiveness in Salem was a verb that might never complete. The trials did not invent fear. They organized it. They did not write the first bad law. They gave bad law a choir. But out of the wreckage came clarities that would help build a different kind of scaffold, the one the law stands on when it refuses frenzy. The American insistence on due process, on the right to confront witnesses, on evidence that behaves when poked. These did not spring only from English precedent but from the aching memory of a hill where 19 people died because stories were believed too easily and doubts held too quietly. If you step into Salem now, on a day when the tourists have come with their curiosity and their cameras and their appetite for a tidy moral, you might be tempted to treat the past like a costume. But the ground says otherwise. It knows what it held and what it returned. There is a corner of the city where a small memorial names those who were hanged, and the stones insist on the simplicity of their testimony. Each slab is a bench of sorts. You can sit in front of a name and read the last words preserved. The refusals, the prayers, the dignities no rope could steal. Stand there and let the story uncostume itself. Hear the scratch of a quill in a cold room where a confession is being phrased to fit a verdict already waiting. Hear the key in the jailer's hand and the chain that makes every ankle an argument. Hear a child's intake of breath before she remembers her role. Hear, too, the counter-melody. A neighbor who, against the grain of the crowd, says quietly that this woman brewed her beer as well as anyone, that this man mended fences and mended quarrels, that they were neither saint nor monster, that they were alive and should be kept that way. Memory is not punishment. It is instruction. The necessary lessons are not exotic. They are the plain weights of civic life. Practice doubt when doubt is mercy. Submit fear to cross-examination. Refuse the courtroom to spectacle. Do not turn grief into a torch and then blame the flame for what it burns. And because Salem is also a story about girls whose voices were either crushed or weaponized with no care for their truths, make a place where the pain of the vulnerable can be heard without being turned into policy by panic or profit. But stories are more than warnings. They are also ways to put a hand on a shoulder 3 centuries distant. Consider Rebecca Nurse, 71, body already in negotiation with time, bones speaking their straightforward language. She walked to the gallows not as an emblem but as a person. A woman who had once learned how to keep a baby from coughing through the night, who had once laughed hard enough to frighten a hen, who had once dipped apple slices in honey and told a child to savor. Consider John Proctor, who in some tellings is the tidy hero but in life was a complicated man, stubborn as old rope, quicker to anger than to apology, and nevertheless deserving of the simple protection of law. Consider Giles Corey, pressed until ribs learned the vocabulary of boulders. His refusal to plead kept his land for his heirs. Even Defiance in Salem learned to be practical. And consider, because stories must go breath to breath and not only scaffold to scaffold, the ordinary nights in houses that were not on fire. Candlelight settling on a wooden bowl. A woman laying a hand on a husband's wrist to say stay. A child asleep with his mouth open like a surprised bird. The good domestic witchcraft of bread rising and a shirt patched at the elbow and a pot coaxed into not burning. All that went on while the trials were going on, and it matters because no panic is ever all of any place. The panic, however, devoured the margins. It always does. The poor, the foreign, the ill, the old, the opinionated, those whom communities rely on to be convenient explanations for what resists explanation, were the kindling. The lesson is not to despise the center but to widen it. A center that can hold only by throwing people out will sooner or later find itself ringed by ghosts that will not agree to be quiet. Let us return a moment to the courtroom. No microphones, no counsel, no clock. Hear the cadence of accusation, the sweet high music of certainty when it is unrehearsed. Even now, those notes are intoxicants. They promise the relief that follows when you can point and say there, that is the shape of your fear. Bind it, purge it, cut it down with whatever blade is near. Salem teaches that the relief is counterfeit. The fear does not leave with the body on the rope. It slips into the magistrate's sleeve, into the landlord's ledger, into the neighbor's mouth. Fear must be interrogated, not indulged. And to interrogate it, you must build rooms where it is safe to ask, what if we are wrong? The rooms we have built. Jury rooms, appellate benches, law libraries thick with precedent. Oh, something precious to the shame that followed 1692. And the sentences we now speak, beyond a reasonable doubt, the right to counsel, to confront one's accuser, to exclude hearsay, are, among other things, spells against the kind of enchantment that carried the day in Salem. Not magical in the sense of spirits and cats with unusual eyes. Magical in the sense of making space where panic cannot breathe. There is, finally, the matter of how stories end. Salem's does not end at the gallows any more than a body ends at the neck. It ends, if it ends at all, in the slow work of repair. Apologies spoken, laws revised, monuments raised carefully in places where grass used to pretend not to remember. It ends in classrooms where children learn what happened without being invited to enjoy it. In courtrooms where judges footnote a witch trial sermon to explain why spectral evidence must stay specter. In living rooms where, on a night when headlines smell like old smoke, someone says, "Listen to me. We have been here before. We can do differently." And because this is a sleep story too, a long twilight between one kind of dream and another, let us close with a night in Salem that did not go wrong. Choose a house. The wind is tired and has come to lie down under the eaves. A woman blows out a candle and the dark arrives like a friend who does not need to speak. A man resets a latch and sets aside the worry that the cow will calve too late or too early or not at all. He will check her at the watch between sleeps. For now he lets the first sleep take him. A child rehearses and dreams a game he will teach his sister tomorrow, where the rules make sense until they don't, and then kindness makes better sense than rules. Midnight opens its palm. The house stirs. The watch wakes those who wake easily. Someone whispers a psalm, not because the devil is at the door, but because gratitude is. The fire is fed, gently. The cow is fine. The baby breathes. In a far house, the afflicted girl who will never be named by history for anything else sleeps without visions. The winter air holds her kindly. In another house, a woman who will be accused in summer rolls on her side and dreams of drying sheets in a wind that smells like soap and river. The second sleep arrives, untroubled. Morning follows without needing to argue for itself. Salem is not only a caution. It is also a reminder of how many nights pass without catastrophe. How many mornings arrive carrying bread and lists and laughter. The trials are a flare that reveals the shape of the furniture in a dark room. But most of life is the hand that learns where the table's edge is and how to set down a bowl without spilling. So sleep now in that knowledge. That fear is real and must be faced. That law is fragile and must be repaired. That neighbors are complicated and must be loved into better behavior. That children tell truths and also learn performances. And that the watch between the first sleep and the second is a good hour for mending nets and vows. And when you wake, whisper what the wiser citizens of Salem learned to say, more weight. Not the stones of panic, but the weight of patience, of evidence, of mercy. We can carry it. We must. We will. Hey friends, deep breath. Lights low, phones face down, fan humming. Tonight we land the whole arc we've been building. From sleepy candlelight Europe to courtrooms that believed in ghosts. From a Roman woman who refused to wait her turn to 250,000 people who stood in the sun and made a country listen. One long night for very different rooms in the same old house called history. No breaks, no headings, just the story. Imagine the village at dusk one last time. The day exhales. Tools leaned against walls, bread cooling, sheep penned. A bell murmurs through air that tastes like smoke and wet dirt. People move in the half-light like they've rehearsed this for centuries because they have. The first sleep comes early, not because anyone is weak, but because darkness is a tax. Fires whisper. A rushlight nods in a clay socket. Even the cat has a shift. And then later, always eyelids bloom back open. The watch begins. In that hour or two, the world is a little softer, a little stranger. A husband rolls to stoke the coals. A wife plucks a splinter from a child's heel by fireglow. A nun kneels and hears the chapel stone answer with its cold. Intimacy is not a grand performance. It's a quiet treaty, signed when the body is warm again and the house has stopped creaking about foxes. Nobody calls this insomnia. They call it the middle of the night, and it belongs to them. Beds? We've already judged them with modern snobbery. Feathers for a few, straw for most, sometimes a plank with aspirations. But it's funny how quickly a routine becomes identity. The straw itches, so you learn the art of stillness. The feather mattress swallows, so you learn the art of climbing out of luxury without believing it was love. And because the night leaks heat faster than it leaks secrets, you sleep together. That doesn't mean romance. It means survival. A cousin's elbow is warmer than pride. A hound's ribs are a better foot warmer than theology. If you're lucky, your pillow doesn't crawl. If you're luckier, you stop noticing. When people wake at midnight, they pray. Not because they're sweet, but because they're scared and practical. God is the only insurance plan with offices open at 1:30 a.m. They pray as if a bad dream can indict them and a good dream can promote them, which is, frankly, how their courts work. Dreams matter. A vision can crown a saint or bully a miller into fasting on a Wednesday. And if you want to understand how a later world could stand in a room and say, with a straight face, "We saw her specter pinch us," you start here, in houses where the soul does night shifts while the body sleeps. Demons, angels, saints, smoke, wind, the noise of mice. The medieval mind feeds all of them in small bowls and then worries about who eats whose dinner. By morning, they have a working theory. It's either God, the devil, or onions. We can smile at the hats. We can wince at the pests. But a truth hides in the draft that sneaks under the door. Night makes people equal in certain humiliations. A count wakes to pee in a chilly room and misses the chamber pot at least once in his life. A farm girl scares herself with her own breath in cold air and laughs before she remembers not to. A monk snores. Another monk judges him for snoring. In the watch, the village is briefly honest. And then the second sleep stoops down like a big brother and carries everyone across what's left of the dark. Dawn is not a miracle. It is a mercy that happens regularly enough to make promises seem plausible. But then the bell changes. Centuries flip, streets grow iron bones, and the new god is a clock. Gaslight elbows the moon off her shift. Factories decide when a day starts and ends. A manager with a pencil behind his ear calls it efficiency. A worker with a cough calls it theft. The two-sleep rhythm is mocked into a disorder. 8 uninterrupted hours becomes virtue. Yawning at 2 a.m. becomes failure. We traded the middle-of-the-night watch for the middle-of-the-night scroll. We lost something and gained something and can't quite measure either because we count with money and regret in different columns. Walk with me north, west, across an ocean, across 200 years and a few hundred sermons, into a winter small town with a large imagination and a smaller tolerance. The houses creak a lot like the old ones did. The people pray a lot like the old ones did. They also fear in high definition. The ground is frozen. The milk has a skin. The last crop was mean. Someone's cow died and someone's temper hasn't recovered and someone's daughter screams in church and won't stop. Tell me how far you are from the rushlight watch. Really, it is the same hour when air is thin and the mind is loud. Your neighbors already live beside invisible things. Now they give those things names with legal consequences. The court opens. You'd think a courtroom would be the daytime's kingdom, but in Salem it's midnight with windows. Children perform pain that adults applaud for its credibility. Grown men take notes on specters. The judges, clean-shaven and certain, convert panic into policy. The audience cries when it should, gasps on cue, wonders whether a world without plumbers and with devils is manageable, and then decides it will be if the gallows cooperate. It does not take long to teach a community how to eat itself. You just need a story that explains why your fear is a public service. Salem writes a manual. How to weaponize suggestion, how to launder grudge into piety, how to outsource your doubt to a committee. A woman will go up a ladder for wearing red and being inconvenient. An old man will go under stones for refusing to play by the rules. A child will confess to things she cannot spell because adults like their fictions vivid. And all the while, the bell rings, the same bell from Vespers, refitted for verdicts. You want to ask the room one question. What would make you stop? Turns out the answer is not pity. It is when accusation starts to nibble the shoes of power. When a governor's wife is named, when a minister turns out to be an implausible demon, when the crowd realizes the machinery has no brakes and, incidentally, no favorites. Then we remember how to be skeptical. The court dissolves itself with the grace of a cat backing off a wet table. People go home to kitchens that have learned their silence well. The dead do not return. The living rehearse regret. We say the Constitution learned some of its manners here. Due process, evidence with edges, the right to see the face of the person who hates you enough to swear it out loud. Those rules, we like to think, sheath the knife. Then a century and a half later, the same country invents new ways to confuse fear with urgency. It's not the same theater, but the props are familiar. A microphone, a printing press, A poster that says the end is nigh except the font is modern and the ink doesn't run in the rain. The old bell learns new tunes. Meanwhile, put down your gavel and pick up a laurel wreath. Rome wants a word. Our Fulvia strides in like a weather front. She has already gone to a funeral and turned it into a referendum. She has already married twice like a general chooses ground. She has learned that grief, wielded correctly, is a political weapon that doesn't dull, only the hand tires. When Antony meets her, he meets not a wife but a faction with a pulse. She opens his letters because somebody has to. She pays soldiers because loyalty and gratitude are not synonyms, and the former eats the latter for breakfast if you forget the difference. She gives Rome a test it fails. Can you handle a woman doing what you secretly admire in men and publicly punish in everyone else? The answer is the same old answer. Rome gossips her into a caricature while copying her homework. She raises legions when men are absent and is called immodest. She negotiates with centurions and is called unnatural. She notices Octavian accumulating land like winter notices firewood and is called jealous. Her enemies write, then history quotes them, and we pretend we can hear her voice through their pens. The Perusine War becomes her sin in mirrors. Exile becomes her verdict. Her last months, Sicion's heir, delayed letters, a husband with Egypt's perfume on him, an illness with many fathers, are written in the heavy ink of convenience. After her death, the map is redrawn without the awkward woman whose fingerprints muddied the edges. Antony marries Octavian's sister, as if treaties can be woven out of a family's quiet endurance. Rome sighs with relief, calls the whole mess a lesson in why people should stick to their lanes, then crowns a different woman a generation later for learning how to steer from the passenger seat. But you can't bury a prototype. You can sand her name off a coin. You can footnote her into scandal. You can teach schoolchildren that real power is a senator's frown lines. Still, the fact remains. Fulvia did what power does. She swapped favors for facts, held the city by its purse, put muscle where her husband had put promises, and used the public stage as if she paid rent for it. In the catalog of things women were never meant to do, she ticked the boxes with both hands and then dared the ledger to keep up. It did not. It smudged. And even smudged ink tells the truth when you tilt the page against light. Turn the page again, and the light is bright. It's August in Washington and the pavement stares back. People have come, so many people that the air feels communal. They are here for jobs and for freedom and for the audacity of writing the word, and between them like it's not a radical punctuation mark. Bayard Rustin has built a whole parade out of clipboards and stamina. He has conjured water and toilets and speakers and routs the way a general conjures bridges. He is brilliant, which makes him dangerous, and openly gay, which makes him more dangerous, and indispensable, which makes everyone swallow their adjectives and sign the permit. Philip Randolph is the elder spine. The big six argue over every comma and then speak as if the sentence wrote itself. People sing and sweat and share sandwiches, and 1,000 tiny kindnesses happen in the shadow of big history because that is how big history survives the day. And then the man you came for opens his mouth and God borrows it. Mahalia says the line she knows will unlock the sermon that knows it is also a speech, that knows it is also a blueprint, that knows it is also a lullaby addressed to a nation that refuses to sleep while chained. Tell them about the dream. A crowd listens with its entire body. The marble behind the speaker pretends it's stone, but you can feel it leaning in. He is not inventing this live. He is calling it down from the shelf where he keeps rehearsed hope and lighting it again at the wick. He does not say, I have a plan. He says, I have a dream, and somehow leaves you with both. When he finishes, the echo takes a long lap around the basin and sits down beside people who will remember this sound in their bones whenever a siren later asks them to forget why they marched. You know what followed. If you don't, the country will remind you with plaques and a long, bruised timeline. Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, both achieved by a choreography of meetings, arrests, terror, stubbornness, litigation, hustling, backroom threats, pulpits, petitions, and that exhausted thing called compromise. King becomes a monument in a bad suit and a target in a good one. Rustin goes back to his 1,000 unsung jobs. John Lewis gets a skull that will remember a certain bridge the way a knee remembers an old soccer season. The girls in Birmingham die and the hymn doesn't know whether to sob or insist. So it does both. People pass laws and then pass new ones to unpass the first ones. The dream remains a verb you have to conjugate daily or it conjugates you. Okay. Why did we drag you through goats and lice and gallows and laurel wreaths and microphones? Because the night is long. Because humans keep trying to shorten it with tools and rules and songs and fail just enough that the morning never gets old. Because sleep patterns become legal patterns, become gender patterns, become protest patterns. Because the same animal, us, who cuddled a pig for warmth, also signed a petition for a neighbor's death. Also scrawled a woman's name on a coin and later insisted she never mattered. Also bought a bus ticket and sat in a hot field to hear a sentence land like rain. The same animal. The variables are light sources, leaders, the price of bread, the shape of rumors, the speed of news, the direction of a wind between tenement roofs. The constants are fear, hope, fatigue, appetite, status, story. So here is the long arc, drawn plain. Medieval knights tell us what bodies do when the world is dark. They sleep in 2 acts. They huddle. They protect flame and soul with the same nervous tenderness. They negotiate the weird. Salem tells us what minds do when fear is given a microphone and a judge. They dramatize, legislate panic, and hang truth for impersonating a stranger. Rome, through Fulvia, tells us what power does when a woman picks it up. It screams in her direction, uses her skill, then blames her for the bruise the empire already had. Washington, 1963, tells us what a crowd can do when it stands together long enough to harmonize. It convinces a nation to sign its name under its own ideals. We like to separate these as museum rooms, medieval, colonial, classical, modern, as if humanity checks its habits at each doorway. But if you stand at the hallway's end and squint, you'll see one silhouette running through all 4. It's us, holding a candle that keeps changing shape. A tallow dip, a law book, a denarius, a microphone. What changes is not our hunger for warmth or fairness or glory or safety. What changes is which stories we believe will deliver those things without eating someone we love. Now let's walk once more through vignettes you might have missed. The soft edges history kept. The ones that don't make it into exam questions but do explain why you and I are quietly different for knowing them. A peasant girl wakes in the watch and sees her mother's profile outlined by hearthlight. The woman is mending a sleeve, and the needle flashes in a rhythm that matches the girl's heartbeat. The girl cannot yet read prayers. She mouths them anyway, catching only the cadence. She thinks, not for the last time, that God must love small spaces because he always shows up in them. 40 years later, she will whisper the same cadence at a granddaughter whose first tooth has erupted like a pearl with opinions. The night will feel friendly. A man in Salem who never accused anyone stands in his field, far from court, and wonders how to be brave. He is not brave. He has seen what bravery buys here. He has 5 mouths at home and 1 cow, and the math is not poetic. He trims a hedge while the trial proceeds and tells himself that neutrality is moral when the outcome is uncertain. He will die in bed at an honest old age. He will be remembered by no plaque. He will be the reason his granddaughter has a mother. He is not a villain. He is not a hero. He is almost everyone in every crisis, which is an indictment and a prayer. Fulvia, on a warm Roman night too humid for olive trees to pretend, writes 3 letters. 1 cajoles a veteran cohort to wait 2 weeks for land. 1 threatens a magistrate who has decided today is his day to be an obstacle. 1 begins with Antonius and ends with nothing because even she cannot decide where to put the knife. In the sentence or in the myth she married. She falls asleep sitting up because that is what the century demands. In the morning she wakes to find the ink has bled, which is how she will be treated later by historians. But for now the letters will be delivered because she pays the courier well, and he is loyal to money if not to men. On the mall, an older woman from Mississippi in a cotton dress that carries the day's heat like a memory stands at the edge of the reflecting pool and taps a paper cup against her thigh. She has never been north of Memphis. She has never seen so many white people not try to be in charge of a space, and it unnerves her more than she expected. She listens, she nods, she cries when that line about "my 4 little children" hooks her by the sternum because she has 4 and none of them has slept without interruption since the police visited 2 summers ago. On the bus home, She leans her head against cool glass that smells like coin and decides to be the person her pastor keeps describing in sermons as the remnant. She will live long enough to vote without a riddle. She will live long enough to watch that right wobble. She will laugh the same laugh both times. Tired, fighting, country, victorious. We could keep going, but dawn is peeking through the blinds in the present tense. So let's do what we came to do. Not just tell, but use. Here are 4 small uses, folded into a single pocket because you said you wanted this as one continuous thing. If you wake at 2 in the morning like your ancestors, count that hour as human, not broken. Light is different now. Schedules are different. Anxiety has Wi-Fi. Still, the watch can be redeemed. Pray if you pray. Stretch, journal, write a letter in your head you will later choose not to send. Do not panic your nervous system into thinking the night is a hallway of wolves. Tell it the truth. We used to split our sleep, and no catastrophe occurred. If you hear the kind of story that Salem's court loved, one that demands immediate violence against a neighbor because of a thing only the storyteller can perceive, do not lend your voice to the chorus until you've opened a window. Ask for evidence that survives daylight. Ask why the narrator is so eager for you to believe without touching. Ask who profits from your outrage and who pays its bill. The devils we should fear come with spreadsheets more often than horns. If you watch a woman pick up a tool everyone swears she will drop, remember Fulvia and adjust your predictions. Let the record show. The Empire always knew how to hire the women it slandered. When a story paints her as jealous, ask what she asked for that someone else already wanted. When a story calls her shrill, listen harder. A lot of the time your hearing strategy turn up to pierce a room tuned for baritones. If you ever stand in a crowd and feel the air grow thick with the knowledge that you are witnessing something large and decent, take a mental photograph with the widest lens you have. Include the people at the edges, the marshals with sunburns, the staff who rented the microphones, the cop who didn't escalate, the kid who fell asleep on a poster, the elder who brought a folding chair and stayed anyway. Later, when someone tries to shrink the day to a single man with a single sentence, you can tell them the truth. A dream is heavy. It takes many arms to carry it without dropping it on the way to a law. We've been together a while tonight, long enough to see that the through line of human nights isn't comfort or terror. It's rehearsal. We rehearse sleeping and waking, fearing and trusting, ruling and resisting, accusing and forgiving, marching and resting. We rehearse better scripts when someone dares to perform them first. The anonymous villager who chooses patience in the watch, the juror who says no in a room that wants a quicker yes, the Roman who refuses to leave the room while decisions are being made in her name, the organizer who puts down a chalk X and tells a bus from Cleveland exactly where to stop so that a woman from Mississippi can see over the heads in front of her. Somewhere right now, a bell is ringing. Somewhere right now, someone is waking and doesn't know if they should be ashamed. Somewhere right now, a committee is drafting rules they'll swear are neutral and aren't. Somewhere right now, a girl is discovering that all the doors in her hallway open if you lean on them like you belong in the room. Somewhere right now, a park is filling. A chant is testing its vowels. A sentence is about to enter a bloodstream and make itself a citizen. When people say history repeats itself, they usually mean the bad parts. I think the good ones repeat too. They just ask for volunteers every time. Nobody inherits courage like a featherbed. You drag it upstairs every generation, sweating, cursing, laughing, and when you collapse on it at the end of a long day, you remember. Someone built this with hands that had other options. So we close. Blow out the candle or click the lamp, or let the screen go dark. If you wake in the middle of the night, smile at your ancestors and take the watch. If someone says the devil made your neighbor do it, ask for receipts. If the room tells a woman to sit quietly, pull out a chair at the table and write her name where everyone can see it. And if the day ever calls you to walk to a place where a microphone waits and the air hums with the possibility of us, show up, stand there, listen hard, and be one of the voices that says the simple, radical thing we keep learning in the long arc of night. Fear is loud, but it is not wise. Truth needs friends. Morning is a team sport. Thank you for staying up with me. Now sleep, or don't. Either way, you're not alone.